The prairie wind tasted of salt and drought that evening, carrying with it the promise of another failed harvest. Lila Hart stood at the cracked stone well behind their weathered, clapboard house, hauling up the rope with practiced efficiency. Each pull revealed how much the water table had dropped since spring. Another foot, maybe two. At this rate, they'd be hauling from the creek by August. "Lila, where's that water?" Her mother's voice drifted from the house, thin as parchment paper. "Coming, Mama." She hefted the half-full bucket and made her way inside, her worn boots clicking against the hard-packed earth. The Hart home sat on the edge of San Bernardino, New Mexico territory, where the grasslands met the foothills of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Once, her father had called it prime grazing land. That was before the drought, before the consumption took him, before the debts started piling up like tumbleweeds against a fence post. Inside, her mother lay propped against faded pillows, her breathing shallow but steady. The sickness had taken the roses from Margaret Hart's cheeks, leaving her pale as bleached cotton. Beside her, Evangeline Ava, to everyone who knew her, sat hemming a dress that shimmered like water in the lamplight. "There you are," Ava said without looking up. Her needle moved in precise, delicate stitches. Everything about Ava was delicate, from her corn silk hair to her small, white hands that had never known a day's hard labor. "I was beginning to think you'd fallen in." Lila set the bucket down harder than necessary. "Water table's dropping again. We'll need to dig deeper soon. We won't need to worry about water much longer." Ava held up the dress, a creation of ivory silk and Belgian lace that must have cost more than their house was worth. "After tomorrow, we'll have all the water we need." Tomorrow? The wedding. Lila's stomach turned as she watched her sister admire her handiwork. Eva was to marry Calder Boone, a man neither of them had met, whose family ran one of the largest cattle operations in the territory. It was a business arrangement, pure and simple. The Boone Ranch needed access to the water rights that came with the Hart property, and the Harts needed the Boone money to pay off their debts to Silas Creed. "You could at least pretend to be happy for me," Ava said, finally meeting her sister's gaze. Those blue eyes, so like their father's, held a challenge. "I am happy." The lie tasted bitter. "You're saving us all." Margaret coughed, a wet sound that had both sisters turning. "My brave girl," she whispered, though whether she meant Eva or Lila was unclear. These days, their mother drifted in and out of clarity like smoke through a chimney. Lila busied herself preparing supper cornmeal mush with the last of the salt pork. As she stirred the pot over the meager fire, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Ava had been acting strange all week, jumping at shadows, staring out windows. Once, Lila had caught her burning a letter in the stove, her face tight with fear. "You ever wonder what he's like?" Lila asked as they ate. "This Calder Boone." Ava's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I'm told he's tolerable to look at, works his own cattle, doesn't drink overmuch." She shrugged, but Lila caught the tremor in her hand. "What more does a woman need?" "Love," Lila thought but didn't say. "Kindness, someone who sees you as more than a water right with a pretty face attached." After supper, while their mother dozed, the sisters sat on the porch watching the sun paint the mountains red as blood. The Sangre de Cristo Range had earned its name honestly at this hour. The peaks looked dipped in crimson. "I need to tell you something," Ava said suddenly, her fingers twisted in her lap, worrying the fabric of her everyday dress. Lila waited. She'd learned long ago that Eva couldn't be rushed when she had something difficult to say. "I've been corresponding with someone, a young man from the mining camps." The words tumbled out in a rush. "His name is Thomas. He's kind. Lila, so kind. He writes poetry and promises me a little house in California where the orange trees grow." I know what you're thinking, but I can't do it. I can't marry a stranger, even to save us." Tears rolled down her perfect cheeks. "And there's more. Silas Creed. He knows about Thomas. He's threatened to tell everyone, to ruin me, unless you what? Ava's voice dropped to a whisper. Unless I convince Mr. Boone to sign over the water rights to him instead of combining them with the ranch. He has the sheriff in his pocket, that awful Amos Keene. They mean to control all the water in the valley. Lila felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Silas Creed owned the largest cattle operation in 3 counties, and he'd been buying up water rights by any means necessary. If he controlled the Blue Mesa springs that fed the valley. When I refused, he said things, did things. Ava's hand went to her throat, where the high collar of her dress hid something. I can't stay here. Lila, I won't survive it. Then we'll tell Mr. Boone. Surely he... Tell him what, that his bride is compromised, that she's been meeting with another man. Ava laughed bitterly. He'll call off the wedding, and we'll lose everything. Mama will die in debtor's prison. You'll end up working in one of those houses in Las Vegas. They sat in silence as the stars emerged one by one. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and others took up the call until the night rang with their music. I'm leaving tonight, Ava said finally. Thomas is waiting for me at Dry Gulch. We'll be in Colorado by week's end. Ava, you can't. I can and I will. Her sister stood, suddenly looking older than her 19 years. But I won't leave you with nothing. She disappeared inside and returned with the wedding dress draped over her arms. In the moonlight, the cheap silk looked almost real. We're close enough in size, with the veil down, in the dim church light. No, Lila shot to her feet. Absolutely not. You're stronger than me. You always have been. Ava pressed the dress into her sister's hands. You can handle a man like Calder Boone. You can save this family. By living a lie, by tricking a man into marriage. By surviving the way you always have. Ava cupped her sister's face. You've kept us fed when there was no food. Kept us warm when there was no wood. You've shot rabbits and mended saddles and done 100 things I was too delicate for. This is just one more thing. This is different. Is it we lie to survive out here? Every woman does. We smile when we want to scream. We say yes, sir, when we mean go to hell. We marry for security instead of love. Ava's eyes glittered fierce and bright. At least this lie serves a purpose. Lila wanted to argue, but the words died in her throat. What choice did they have without the Boone money? They'd lose the house within the month. Their mother would never survive being moved. What happens when he realizes? Make sure he doesn't, not until it's too late. Ava was already gathering her few belongings. The marriage certificate will say Miss Hart. That's all that matters to the law. And if he sets me aside, has the marriage annulled? Ava paused at the door. Then you'll be no worse off than you are now, but I don't think he will. The Boones need our water as much as we need their money. She smiled sadly. Besides, you're twice the woman I am. Lila Hart, maybe he'll even thank you for the trade. Then she was gone, slipping into the darkness like a ghost. Lila stood on the porch holding the wedding dress, feeling the weight of it like chains. Inside, her mother coughed in her sleep. In town, a dog barked. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain that would probably never fall. She thought of Calder Boone, a stranger who would arrive tomorrow expecting a delicate bride named Evangeline. Instead, he'd get Lila rough-handed. Sharp-tongued Lila, who could shoot a rifle and birth a calf but had never danced at a social or poured tea from fine china. The moon rode high over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painting everything in silver and shadow. Somewhere out there, Ava was riding toward her poet minor. And here stood Lila, holding a future she'd never wanted but couldn't refuse. She went inside and hung the dress carefully from a peg. Tomorrow she would put it on. Tomorrow she would stand before God and the good people of San Perdido and promise to honor and obey a man she'd never met. Tonight, though, She allowed herself to cry quietly, so as not to wake her mother. She cried for Ava, riding into danger, for her mother, dying by degrees, for herself, about to trade her name for her family's survival. When the tears were done, she wiped her face and began preparing. There was water to haul, animals to tend, a rifle to clean. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. Tonight, she was still Lila Hart, and there was work to be done. The wind howled through the gaps in the walls, and she thought she heard thunder in the distance. But thunder had been promising rain for months now, and the prairie remained dry as old bones. Some promises, she was learning, were made to be broken. The wedding dress hung on Lila like a shroud. She stood before the cracked mirror in the sacristy of San Perdido's small wooden church, trying not to think about how the cheap silk clung wrong to her work-hardened frame. Ava had been built like a willow branch, all graceful curves and delicate bones. Lila was built like what she was, a woman who'd spent her life hauling water and mending fences. "Stop fussing with it, Mrs." Abernathy said, slapping Lila's hands away from the neckline. The minister's wife had volunteered to help prepare the bride, though her pinched expression suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. "You'll tear the lace." The lace was already torn in 3 places, hastily mended with thread that didn't quite match. But beneath the heavy veil, Ava had left behind good Belgian lace. Probably worth more than the dress itself. No one would notice such details. "Your sister's taken ill, Mrs." Abernathy's tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it. "Terribly ill," Lila confirmed, practicing the lie she'd tell all day. "Started with a fever in the night. Dr. Morrison says it might be scarlet fever. Very contagious." The older woman stepped back hastily. Fear of illness ran deep in the territories, where a simple fever could mean death. "Well then, it's fortunate you're of a size, though you'll need to remember to walk like a lady, not like you're heading out to brand cattle." Through the thin walls, Lila could hear the congregation gathering, boots on wooden floors, the rustle of Sunday clothes, low voices speculating about the union between the Hart and Boone families. She wondered how many were here for the spectacle rather than the sacrament. "He's arrived," someone called from outside. "The groom's here." Lila's heart hammered against her ribs. This was madness. She should tear off this dress, confess everything, let the chips fall where they may. But then she thought of her mother, coughing up blood into handkerchiefs, of the notice from the bank, giving them 30 days to pay or vacate, of Silas Creed's men, who'd been circling their property like vultures for months. "Time to go, dear, Mrs." Abernathy adjusted the veil one last time, pulling it forward to shadow Lila's face. "Remember small steps, eyes down, and for heaven's sake, try to look delicate." The church was packed. Every pew groaned under the weight of curious neighbors, rival ranchers, and townspeople eager to witness the union that would reshape the valley's water rights. Lila kept her eyes on the floor, counting the warped planks as she made her way down the aisle. 1, 2, 3. The organ wheezed out a wedding march, played by the half-deaf widow Hutchins, who hit every 3rd note wrong. The sound masked the whispers that followed in Lila's wake. "Doesn't look quite right. Walking funny. Where's the younger one, the pretty one?" At the altar, Reverend Morrison waited with his worn Bible and patient smile, and beside him, Lila risked a glance up and nearly stumbled. Calder Boone was nothing like she'd imagined. She'd expected someone soft, privileged, wearing fancy clothes and a superior expression. Instead, she found herself looking at a man carved from the same hard land that had shaped her. Tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands. His suit was good quality, but worn with the awkwardness of someone more comfortable in work clothes. Dark hair, recently trimmed, and eyes the color of twilight, not quite blue, not quite gray. Those eyes were studying her with an intensity that made her stomach drop. Could he tell already? Could he see through the veil to the deception beneath? She reached the altar and stood frozen. unsure of the protocol. In her panic to prepare, she'd forgotten to ask about the details of the ceremony. "Miss Hart," Calder said, and his voice was lower than expected, rougher. He offered his hand, and she had no choice but to take it. His palm was hard with calluses, the hand of a man who worked alongside his ranch hands. When their skin touched, something electric passed between them, not attraction, exactly, but recognition, as if like had called to like. The ceremony began. Reverend Morrison's voice droned on about duty and obedience, about two becoming one flesh. Lila heard none of it. She was too aware of the man beside her, of the weight of eyes upon them, of Sheriff Amos Keene standing at the back of the church with two of Silas Creed's men. "Do you, Miss Hart, take this man, eh?" She jerked back to attention. "I do," she managed, her voice muffled by the veil. "And do you, Calder Boone?" "I do." No hesitation in his response, though those twilight eyes never left her veiled face. "The ring—" Calder produced a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "Was my mother's," he said quietly, sliding it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made for her work-rough hands rather than Ava's delicate ones. "You may now kiss your bride." This was it, the moment of truth. Lila's hands trembled as Calder reached for her veil. She could run, she should run, but her feet remained planted on the warped wooden floor as he lifted the lace. Time slowed. She saw the exact moment recognition dawned in his eyes, not the recognition of meeting before, but the understanding that she wasn't who he'd expected. His hands stilled. The congregation held its breath. Then he leaned close, his breath warm against her ear, and whispered words that changed everything. "You're not Ava." Before she could respond, before she could deny or confess or do anything at all, he kissed her. It wasn't the perfunctory peck she'd expected, the dutiful brush of lips to seal a business arrangement. This was something else entirely. His mouth was warm and sure against hers, one hand cupping her face with surprising gentleness. The kiss was a claiming, yes, but also a question, and somehow, impossibly, an answer. He kissed her like he knew her, like he'd been waiting for her specifically, not her prettier sister or any other woman, like he could taste the truth on her lips, and found it sweeter than any lie. The world fell away. There was no church, no crowd, no deception. There was only this, the solid warmth of him, the calluses on his palm against her cheek, the way her whole body suddenly felt alive and electric and real. Then the church doors burst open with a bang that shattered the moment. "Stop this wedding!" Sheriff Keene's voice boomed across the sanctuary. "There's been a deception." Calder's arm came around Lila's waist, pulling her against his side in a gesture that felt both protective and possessive. "The ceremony's done. Sheriff, whatever complaint you have can wait." "I think not." Keene strode down the aisle, spurs jangling with each step. Behind him, Silas Creed's men spread out, hands resting on their gun belts. "Had word that the real Eva Hart was seen riding north last night. This woman's an imposter." Gasps rippled through the congregation. Misses. Abernathy fanned herself dramatically. Reverend Morrison clutched his Bible like a shield. "That's a serious accusation." Calder said. His voice remained calm, but Lila felt the tension coiling through his body. "You have proof." Keene's smile was all teeth. "Why don't we ask the bride herself? Remove the veil, girl. Let's see who you really are." Lila lifted her chin. The veil was already displaced from the kiss, and there was no point in pretending now. "I'm Lila Hart," she said clearly. "Ava's sister." The church erupted. People shouting, arguing, pressing forward to get a better look at the scandal unfolding. Through it all, Calder's arm never left her waist. "You see," Keene addressed the crowd. "Fraud. This marriage is invalid." "The certificate says Miss Hart," Calder pointed out. "Which she is, And we spoke vows before God and witnesses. That makes it legal in the territories. Keen's face darkened. You can't mean to honor this farce. Why not? I came here for a heart bride with water rights. I got one. Calder's tone was mild, but there was steel beneath it. Unless you're suggesting the elder Miss Hart doesn't have the same legal standing as her sister. It was a clever argument. Women's rights were limited in the territories, but unmarried daughters inherited equally. If Keen pushed too hard, he'd risk setting a precedent that could affect property law throughout New Mexico. This isn't over, Keen snarled. He jerked his head at Creed's men. Mister, Creed will want words with you both. He knows where to find me. Calder replied. The sheriff stormed out, his men trailing behind. Gradually, the congregation settled, though whispers continued to fly like arrows. Reverend Morrison cleared his throat. Well then, I suppose I pronounce you man and wife. Already did that, Reverend? Calder turned to Lila, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Mrs. Boone, I believe we have a reception to attend. The reception was to be held at the hotel, a modest affair with cake and punch. But as they stepped outside, Lila saw Creed's men positioned around the building, waiting. Can you ride? Calder asked quietly. Better than I can walk in this damn dress. A smile flickered across his face, the first real emotion she'd seen from him. Good. When I give the word, you run for that bay mare tied to the post. She's fast and she knows the way home. What about you? I'll be right behind you. He guided her down the church steps, nodding pleasantly to well-wishers while keeping his body between her and Creed's men. Steady now. Almost there. They were 10 feet from the horses when one of Creed's men stepped into their path. Mister, Creed wants to offer his congratulations to the bride. In private. How thoughtful, Calder said, but we really must. The man's hand moved toward his gun. I insist. What happened next was so fast, Lila almost missed it. Calder spun her behind him while simultaneously drawing a Navy Colt she hadn't even known he was carrying. The barrel pressed against the gunman's throat before he could clear leather. Now, Calder said conversationally. Lila didn't need to be told twice. She hiked up the wedding dress and ran for the bay mare, vaulting into the saddle with practiced ease. Behind her, shouts erupted. A gunshot cracked through the air, followed by the thunder of hooves. Calder appeared beside her on a huge black stallion, his suit jacket flapping like wings. Ride, he shouted, and they flew. They pounded through the streets of San Perdido, scattering chickens and pedestrians. More shots rang out behind them. A bullet whined past Lila's ear, close enough to feel the heat. Then they were out of town, racing across the open prairie toward the Sangre de Cristo foothills. The wedding dress streamed behind Lila like a banner, the cheap silk tearing with each stride. She'd never felt more alive. They didn't slow until the town was a speck on the horizon. Calder led them into a grove of cottonwoods near a stream, where the horses could drink and catch their breath. Well, he said, dismounting with easy grace, that wasn't quite how I pictured my wedding day. Lila slid from the saddle, her legs shaky with adrenaline. About that, I can explain. No need. He pulled off his string tie and used it to wipe dust from his face. Your sister lit out for greener pastures, leaving you to clean up the mess. Story old as the territory itself. You're not angry. He considered this, those twilight eyes studying her with unnerving intensity. Depends. You planning to shoot me in my sleep and steal my cattle? No. Run off with the first smooth-talking drummer who comes through town? Definitely not. Then I reckon we'll manage. He moved closer, and Lila fought the urge to step back. I didn't come here for love, Mrs. Boone. I came for a partnership. Your water, my cattle. A combined operation that could survive whatever's coming. Your sister might have been prettier, but pretty doesn't dig wells or mend fences. How did you know when you kissed me? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The hands? Your sister had hands like a debutante. Yours have calluses in all the right places. Besides," he added, "when I lifted that veil, you looked ready to fight me rather than faint. Figured any woman with that much steel in her spine was worth keeping. Creed won't give up easily. He wants our water." "Let him want." Calder's expression hardened. "I've dealt with his kind before. The question is whether you're willing to stand with me when he comes calling." Lila thought of Ava, somewhere on the road to Colorado with her poet, of her mother, dying by inches in their crumbling house, of the land her father had loved, now threatened by drought and greed. "I'll stand," she said. He nodded, satisfied. "Then we'd best get home. We've got a ranch to run, and I suspect tomorrow's going to be interesting." As they mounted up again, Lila caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What?" "Just thinking," he said. "When I kissed you in that church, you kissed me back." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I was maintaining the deception." "Uh-huh." He turned his horse toward the mountains. "Keep telling yourself that. Mrs. Boone." They rode in companionable silence toward the Boone Ranch, toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the sun began its descent, painting the Sangre de Cristo peaks crimson. Somewhere in the distance, a gunshot echoed a promise or a threat. Lila couldn't tell which. But she'd made her choice in that church, sealed it with a kiss that still burned on her lips. She was Lila Boone now, for better or worse, and whatever came next, she'd meet it the way she met everything else, head up, eyes clear, ready to fight. The wedding dress was ruined, torn and dusty from their wild flight. Good, she thought. She'd never been meant for silk and lace anyway. The storm hit 3 days into their flight. They'd been moving steadily northwest, keeping to the high country where Creed's men would be harder pressed to follow. Calder knew the land like the back of his hand, leading them through hidden canyons and across ridges Lila hadn't even known existed. But all his knowledge couldn't hold back the wall of red dust that came rolling across the desert like God's own fury. "Haboob," Calder shouted over the rising wind, using the old Mexican word for the massive dust storms. "We need shelter." Lila pulled her neckerchief up over her nose and mouth, squinting through the stinging grit. She'd changed out of the ruined wedding dress that first night, borrowing clothes from Calder's saddlebags, men's pants and a shirt that hung loose on her frame. Now she was grateful for the sturdy cloth as the sand tried to scour the skin from her bones. The horses struggled against the wind, heads down, eyes rolling white with fear. Calder's black stallion, Tempest, kept trying to turn his rump to the storm, while Lila's bay mare pressed close against them, seeking comfort. "There," Calder pointed to a shadow in the rock face, a cave or overhang. They fought their way toward it, half blind. The world reduced to a howling brown nightmare. The shelter turned out to be a shallow cave, barely deep enough to hold them and the horses. They crowded in, humans and animals alike, while outside the storm raged like a living thing. "This'll last hours," Calder said, shaking dust from his hat. In the dim light filtering through the storm, his face was masked with grit, only his eyes showing clear. "Maybe till morning." Lila nodded, too parched to speak. Their water was running low, 2 canteens between them, and the horses had drunk most of their share at the last stream. She measured out careful sips from her canteen, no more than enough to wet her throat. "Here." Calder offered his own canteen. "You need it." "We share equal or not at all," she said firmly. It was an old rule of the desert, one her father had taught her. Never take more than your portion, no matter how it's offered. Something flickered in his eyes, respect. Maybe. Fair enough. They settled in to wait, backs against the cave wall, shoulders touching in the cramped space. Outside, the storm howled and raged, turning day to an eerie twilight. "Why aren't you asking questions?" Lila said finally. The silence between them had weight, like water in a deep well. About Eva, why she ran, what creed has on her. She picked at a loose thread on her borrowed shirt. Most men would want to know everything about the woman they'd expected to marry. Calder was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Would knowing change anything? She's gone. You're here. That's what matters. You're a strange man, Calder Boone. So I've been told. He shifted slightly, and she caught the wince he tried to hide. You're not exactly common yourself. Most women would be crying or fainting after what we've been through. Most women haven't spent their lives hauling water up from wells that get deeper every year. She studied his profile in the gloom. You're hurt. From the fight in town. It's nothing. But when she pressed her hand to his side, he hissed in pain. Her fingers came away dark with blood. Nothing, he says. She was already moving, checking the depth of the wound with practiced efficiency. Bullet graze. Your lucky inch to the left and we'd be having a different conversation. Or no conversation at all. Hold still. She tore strips from the bottom of her shirt, using precious water to clean the wound. He bore her ministrations in silence, though she felt the tension in his body when she bound the makeshift bandage tight. Where'd you learn doctoring? When you're the only one who stays steady at the sight of blood, you learn fast. She tied off the bandage with quick, sure knots. Papa used to say I had healing hands. Course, he also said Eva had the face of an angel, and look where that got us. The storm continued outside, but its fury seemed to be lessening. In the growing quiet, she became acutely aware of their closeness, of the heat radiating from his body, of the way his breathing had quickened when she touched him. Thank you, he said quietly. It's just a bandage. Not for that, for not lying to me. You could have kept pretending to be Eva. For how long until you asked about something only she would know? Until someone who'd met her came calling? Lila shook her head. I'm no good at pretending to be something I'm not. No, he agreed. You're not. They dozed fitfully as the storm passed, taking turns keeping watch. Near dawn, Lila woke to find Calder's duster draped over her like a blanket. He sat at the cave mouth, rifle across his knees, silhouetted against the growing light. Storms passed, he said without turning. We should move. They'll be tracking us. Come full light. They emerged into a world transformed. The storm had scoured the land clean, leaving strange sculptures in the sand and exposing rocks that gleamed like bones. The horses shook themselves, sending up small clouds of dust. Water first. Calder decided. There's a spring about 3 miles north, hidden in a box canyon. They rode in companionable silence, the early morning air cool against their skin. Lila found herself stealing glances at the man beside her, trying to reconcile the dangerous gunfighter who'd faced down Creed's men with a thoughtful companion who'd covered her with his coat. The spring, when they reached it, was a miracle, clear water bubbling up from red rock, feeding a small pool shaded by cottonwoods. The horses drank deeply while Lila and Calder refilled their canteens. How do you know about this place? She asked, splashing cool water on her face and neck. Spent some time in these parts before. He seemed about to say more, then stopped. Before what? Before I became respectable. His smile held secrets. We all have our histories, Mrs. Boone. She was about to press further when he held up a hand for silence. In the distance, carried on the still air, came the sound of horses. How many? She whispered. 4, maybe 5. He was already moving, checking his rifle, counting ammunition. Too many for a straight fight. The canyon narrows past the spring, Lila said, remembering the lay of the land. If we could get above them. You're thinking like a tactician. He looked at her with something like admiration. All right. You take the horses up the east trail. I'll set up on the west rim. We stay together, she said firmly. That's not negotiable." He looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. Together, then. They climbed quickly, leading the horses up a narrow deer trail that switchbacked up the canyon wall. Below, the riders came into view, 5 men, armed and dusty, moving with the purposeful air of hunters on a trail. "That's Jake Tully in front," Calder murmured. "Creed's best tracker. If he's here, Creed's serious about finding us." They settled behind a jumble of boulders, rifles ready. The riders reached the spring and dismounted, letting their horses drink while they studied the ground. "They were here," Tully called out, "not more than an hour ago." "Split up," another man suggested. "Check both trails." "No," Tully's voice carried clearly in the still air. "We stay together. Boone's dangerous when he's cornered." Lila felt Calder tense beside her. "They know you?" she whispered. "Old acquaintances." His finger rested on the trigger guard, ready but not eager. "I'd rather not kill them if we can avoid it." "Then what?" He scanned the canyon walls, calculating. "See that overhang, the one that looks ready to fall?" She followed his gaze to a precarious pile of rocks balanced above the trail. One good push. "Can you make that shot?" "Can you?" he countered. She studied the distance, the angle, the wind. "Yes." "On my mark, then." He shifted position slightly. "And Lila, after we fire, we run like hell." Below, the riders were mounting up again. Tully led them toward the east trail, the one that would bring them directly under the loose rocks. "Wait," Calder breathed. "Wait." The riders bunched up at a narrow spot in the trail. Now, they fired simultaneously. The bullets struck the keystone rocks with sharp cracks that echoed through the canyon. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the overhang gave way with a roar like thunder. Rocks and dirt cascaded down, sending the riders' horses into panic. Men shouted and cursed, fighting to control their mounts as debris rained around them. No one was hurt. Calder had been precise about that, but the trail was thoroughly blocked. "Move!" Calder grabbed Lila's hand, and they ran for the horses. Behind them, Tully's voice rose in fury. "Boone, you bastard, this isn't over!" They mounted at a run and flew down the west trail, hooves clattering on stone. The blocked trail would buy them time, but not much. Tully would find another way round. Miles later, when they finally slowed the horses to a walk, Lila found herself laughing wild, breathless laughter that had nothing to do with humor and everything to do with being alive. "You're enjoying this," Calder observed. "Maybe I am." She felt wild and free, more herself than she'd been in years. "Does that make me odd?" "It makes you perfect for this life." He gestured at the vast landscape around them. "Not everyone can handle the uncertainty. And you, can you handle it?" "I've been handling it for years." His expression grew distant, though usually alone. They made camp that night in a grove of ancient pines, high enough to see anyone approaching from below. Calder snared 2 rabbits, and Lila found wild onions growing near a seep. They ate well for the first time in days, sitting close to the small fire as stars emerged overhead. "I need to tell you something," Calder said as they cleaned the dishes with sand. "About why I really came to San Perdido." Lila waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. "I wasn't just looking for a wife with water rights." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather notebook, worn and water-stained. "I've been keeping track. Every ranch Creed's taken over, every family he's driven out, names, dates, details." She took the notebook, flipping through pages covered in neat handwriting. The list was longer than she'd imagined. Why? Because someone needs to. Because the law in these parts is bought and paid for. But federal law, that's different. He stared into the fire. "I've been building a case, gathering evidence. Your water rights were supposed to be the last piece. You're not just a rancher. No more than you're just a seamstress. He met her gaze. We're both more than we seem. Lila Boone. Question is, what do we do about it? She thought about the names in the notebook. Families like hers ground under Creed's boot heel. Thought about her mother, dying while men played games with their survival. Thought about justice and what it might cost. We fight, she said simply. Together. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weather-worn face. Together, he agreed. That night, she lay in her bedroll, listening to coyotes sing in the distance. Calder sat watch nearby, a comforting presence in the darkness. She thought about Eva, somewhere safe with her poet, about the life she'd left behind in San Perdido, about the dangerous, uncertain future stretching before them. She thought about that kiss in the church, how it had felt like recognition, like coming home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Creed wouldn't give up easily, and the trail to justice was long and treacherous. But tonight, under the vast desert sky, with this strange, dangerous, honorable man keeping watch, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The fire crackled low, sending sparks into the darkness. Somewhere in the pines, an owl called, and another answered, and Lila Hart no. Lila Boone closed her eyes and slept without dreams, her hand resting on the rifle beside her, ready for whatever dawn might bring. The town of Dry Gulch sat like a scab on the desert's face, rough, ugly, but necessary. It was the kind of place that existed solely because the railroad needed a water stop. And where the railroad went, commerce followed. The post office occupied a corner of the general store, squeezed between shelves of canned goods and bolts of calico. Lila waited outside with the horses while Calder went in to check for messages. They'd cleaned up as best they could at a creek that morning, but dust still clung to every crease and fold. She kept her hat pulled low, watching the street through narrowed eyes. A drunk stumbled out of the saloon across the way. Squinting in the afternoon sun, two women in faded dresses gossiped outside the boarding house. Normal frontier town life? Except for the tension that ran beneath it like an underground river. Everyone knew Silas Creed's reach extended far beyond San Perdido. Calder emerged from the store, his expression carefully neutral, but Lila had learned to read the subtle signs, the tightness around his eyes, the way his hand drifted toward his gun belt. "Trouble?" she asked quietly as he swung into the saddle. "Let's ride. I'll explain outside town." They headed north at an easy pace. Just two more travelers on a well-worn trail. Only when Dry Gulch had shrunk to a smudge on the horizon did Calder rein in. There was a telegram waiting. He pulled a folded paper from his vest. From the U.S. Marshal's office in Santa Fe. Lila's heart jumped. "They received your evidence." More than that. He handed her the telegram. "Read it." The message was brief, written in the choppy style necessitated by telegraph fees. Boone, stop cover compromised. Stop Creed knows your federal connection. Stop Judge Harlan involved deeper than suspected. Stop maintain distance until backup arrives. Stop signed Morris and Chief Marshal. Stop. "You're a federal agent." The words came out strangled. It's complicated." He took the telegram back, folding it carefully. "I was supposed to be investigating cattle rustling. Routine stuff. But the deeper I dug, the more I found. Creed's operation goes beyond theft. He's building an empire on stolen land and corrupted law." "And you didn't think to mention this before we got married?" Would it have changed anything? His twilight eyes met hers steadily. "You needed protection from Creed. I needed a legitimate reason to access those water rights records. The marriage served both purposes." She wanted to be angry, but found she couldn't muster the energy. After all, hadn't she deceived him too? So what now? "Now we have a bigger problem." He pointed to a dust cloud on the southern horizon. "We've been followed." They spurred the horses to a gallop, heading for the broken country ahead where they might lose pursuit. but whoever was following knew their business. The dust cloud neither gained nor fell back, maintaining a steady distance like a wolf tracking wounded prey. There, Lila pointed to a cluster of buildings ahead. Is that a town? Mining camp, abandoned. Calder's jaw tightened. Not ideal, but we need cover. The camp was a collection of rotting boards and broken dreams. The silver had played out years ago, leaving behind empty shafts and buildings that leaned drunkenly against each other. They rode between structures that seemed held up by habit alone, finally taking shelter in what had been the assay office stone walls that would stop bullets and a clear view of the approaches. They'll wait for dark, Calder predicted, checking his rifle. Try to take us while we're sleeping. Then we don't sleep. Lila found a position at one of the broken windows. Tell me about Judge Harlan. Federal circuit judge out of Kansas, supposed to be bringing law to the territories. Calder's laugh was bitter. Instead, he's been validating every false deed and claim creed files, making it all legal on paper. And can you prove it? That's what the evidence in my notebook was building toward, but testimony would help. Living witnesses who've been cheated. Like me. Like you. He glanced at her. Though technically you haven't been cheated yet, the marriage is legal, the water rights are protected. For now. Silence fell between them, broken only by the wind whistling through gaps in the walls. The sun began its descent, painting long shadows across the abandoned camp. There, Lila whispered. Movement by the old stamp mill. Calder shifted to look. Good eyes. How many? 2, maybe 3. She studied the terrain. They're trying to flank us. Which means there are more coming from the other direction. He made a quick decision. We can't defend this position against a coordinated attack. We need to move. Where? The mine shaft. If it hasn't collapsed, it might connect to others. These old camps are like anthills underground. They slipped out the back of the assay office, keeping to the shadows. The mine entrance gaped like a mouth in the hillside, timber frames showing gray in the dying light. Calder lit a lucifer match, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into blackness. I don't like caves, Lila admitted. Neither do I, but I like bullets less. He offered his hand. Trust me. She took his hand without hesitation. Yes. They plunged into the darkness just as shouts erupted behind them. The match died, leaving them blind. Calder kept one hand on the tunnel wall, leading them deeper, behind them. Voices echoed off stone. They went in here. Well, go after them. You go. I ain't chasing nobody into a mine shaft. Calder struck another match, revealing a junction ahead. He chose the left passage without hesitation. Old trick. Always go left in a mine. Eventually, you'll circle back. How do you know that? Spent 6 months undercover in a Colorado gold camp. The match died again. Long story. They felt their way forward, the air growing colder and damper. Somewhere, water dripped with metronomic persistence. The voices behind them had faded, but Lila knew their pursuers hadn't given up. Then, blessed relief, a glimmer of a light ahead. They emerged from a different shaft entirely, half a mile from where they'd entered. The sun was nearly gone, the sky painted in shades of purple and gold. The horses, Lila realized with dismay. They'll have taken them. Calder scanned the twilight landscape. We're on foot now. There might be another way. She pointed to the old mining camp cemetery, visible on a rise. My father told me stories. During the Apache Wars, some camps kept horses hidden in case of raids. It's worth a look. They made their way carefully to the cemetery, a collection of wooden markers and rock cairns. Behind it, almost invisible in the sagebrush, stood a small stable built into the hillside. Inside, incredibly, were 2 horses. Not fine animals, a spavined mare and a gelding well past his prime, but they had 4 legs and appeared sound enough. Mining camps, Calder said with appreciation. Always planning for disaster. They saddled the horses with tack that was cracked but serviceable. As they led them out, a figure stepped from behind a gravestone. Going somewhere. Lila's heart stopped, but it wasn't one of Creed's men. It was a woman, thin and weathered, wearing men's clothing and holding a shotgun with practiced ease. "These are my horses," the woman said. "Been tending them since the camp died. You'd be the folks those riders are hunting." "We are," Calder admitted. "And we're in need of help." The woman studied them with sharp eyes. "You're the federal man. Heard about you. And this must be the bride who wasn't supposed to be." She lowered the shotgun. "Name's Sarah Platt. My husband died in these mines, along with his dreams. Silas Creed holds the note on his claims." "We can't pay you for the horses," Lila said. "Didn't ask for payment." Sarah spat tobacco juice with remarkable accuracy. "But if you're really building a case against Creed, I've got something might interest you." She led them back to a shack hidden among the ruins, where she produced a strongbox from beneath the floorboards. Inside were papers, deeds, contracts, receipts. My Tom kept records of everything, including the original assay reports showing this claim was worthless. Creed had them altered after Tom died, made it look like there was still silver. Sold shares to investors back east based on those false reports. "This is evidence of fraud." Calder breathed. "Federal fraud. Crossing state lines. This changes everything." "Then take it." Sarah pushed the box toward them. "I'm leaving anyway. Nothing left here but ghosts." "Come with us," Lila urged. "It's dangerous alone." "Been alone 3 years now. I'll manage." Sarah walked them back to the horses. "There's a letter in there, too. Tom wrote it but never sent it. Addressed to someone named Eva Hart. Said she should know the truth about what Creed was planning." Lila's blood ran cold. "Eva, you're certain?" "That's what it says. Tom was sweet on her once, before she took up with that Creed fellow." The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Eva hadn't just been threatened by Creed, she'd been involved with him. The pregnancy, the fear, the flight to her poet miner. It all made terrible sense. "We need to go," Calder said quietly. He'd reached the same conclusions. They mounted the old horses and rode into the night. Sarah's papers secured in Calder's saddlebags. Behind them, torches moved through the mining camp like fireflies as Creed's men continued their search. "Eva knew," Lila said when they were safely away. "She knew what Creed was planning and said nothing." She was frightened, maybe threatened. Or complicit. The betrayal stung worse than any physical wound. She left me to face him knowing what he was. But she also left. Calder's voice was gentle. Whatever her involvement, she chose to run rather than go through with it. They rode in silence after that, each lost in thought. The old horses were slow but steady, picking their way across the desert by starlight. Near dawn, they reached a telegraph station, a lonely outpost servicing the railroad. "We need to send word to the marshal," Calder said. "Let them know about the new evidence." While he went inside, Lila sat with the horses, watching the sun rise over the desert. Everything had changed with Sarah's revelations. The fight against Creed was no longer just about water rights or even justice. It was personal now, tangled up with family betrayal and secrets. Calder emerged looking grim. "I sent the message. Also picked up some news. There's a federal judge riding circuit who'll be in Las Vegas next week. Judge Samuel Carter from Colorado. He's got a reputation for being incorruptible. Unlike Harlan." "Exactly, if we can get to him. Present our evidence." He trailed off. But Lila understood. It was their chance to bypass the corrupted local system entirely. "Then we ride for Las Vegas." "It won't be easy. Creed will have men watching every road, every waterhole." "Good thing we've got a federal agent who knows the back trails." She managed a smile despite everything. and a desert rat who can make water from stones. He mounted up beside her. Lila, about Ava. Don't, she cut him off. I'll deal with my sister's choices later. Right now, we have work to do. They turned their horses north, toward Las Vegas, and whatever justice might wait there. The sun climbed higher, already promising another day of heat and dust. But for the first time since leaving San Perdito, Lila felt they had a real chance. In her saddlebag, Tom Platt's evidence rested like a loaded gun. And beside her rode a man she was beginning to trust with more than just her life. The road ahead was long and dangerous, but they would ride it together, and that, she was learning, made all the difference. The market square in San Perdito had never seen such a crowd. Word had spread like wildfire that Calder and Lila Boone had returned, and it seemed every soul in 50 miles had come to witness what would happen next. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the gathered townsfolk, but nobody moved from their positions around the makeshift platform where Sheriff Amos Keene held court. Lila Hart, Keene's voice boomed across the square. Or should I say, Mrs. Boone, step forward. Lila felt Calder's hand on her elbow, steadying her. They'd known this was a trap the moment they'd ridden into town an hour ago. But the federal judge would be in Las Vegas tomorrow. They needed to buy time, and more importantly, they needed witnesses. I'm here, Sheriff, Lila called out, stepping away from Calder's protective presence. She kept her back straight, her chin high, despite the hostile murmurs rippling through parts of the crowd. Keene stood on a wooden platform, usually used for livestock auctions, his badge glinting in the sun. Beside him, Silas Creed sat in a chair like a king holding court, his pale eyes scanning the crowd with satisfaction. You stand accused of fraud, Keene announced. Impersonating your sister to enter into a false marriage contract, mister. Creed here has generously offered to forgive this deception if you'll simply sign over the water rights to your property. Generously, Lila's voice carried clear across the square. Is that what you call it when a man threatens a family, drives them to desperation, then swoops in to steal what little they have left? Watch your tongue, woman, Creed said softly, but his voice carried menace. Slander is also a crime. Truth isn't slander. Lila reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded paper. I have here a list of names. Would you like me to read them? Mr. Creed, the Hendersons, forced off their land after their well mysteriously went dry. The Pacheco family, whose cattle died from poisoned water after they refused to sell. The Martins, the Johnsons, the... Enough, Keene stepped forward. This isn't a court of law. You'll sign these papers now, or I'll arrest you for fraud and conspiracy. On whose authority? Calder's voice cut through the tension like a blade. He moved to stand beside Lila, and she noticed several men in the crowd shift nervously. His reputation, it seemed, preceded him. On my authority as duly appointed sheriff of this county, Keene snarled. Appointed by whom? The town council? Calder's smile was sharp as a knife edge. Because I've been checking the records. Funny thing, there's no official documentation of your appointment. Just a note signed by Judge Harlan, who doesn't have jurisdiction to appoint local law enforcement. The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like ripples in a pond. Many of them had suspected, but hearing it stated so boldly was different. You calling me illegitimate? Keene's hand dropped to his gun. I'm calling you bought and paid for. Calder's hand didn't move toward his weapon, but somehow he seemed more dangerous for it. Just like your boss there. That's when things might have turned violent, except for an unexpected interruption. Mrs. Abernathy, the minister's wife who'd helped Lila dress for the wedding, pushed through the crowd. I've held my tongue long enough, she announced, her usually pinched face flushed with indignation. Amos Keene, you're a disgrace. Threatening a young woman in broad daylight, trying to steal what her father worked his whole life to build. Sit down, you old biddy, someone shouted, one of Creed's men. But Mrs. Abernathy had opened a floodgate. Old Samuel Martinez, who ran the general store, stepped forward. "The Harts have been good neighbors for 20 years. They pay their debts when they can, help others when needed. What's Creed ever done but take—" "He provides jobs," Keene countered. "Keeps the economy running. With wages so low, a man can't feed his family." This from Jim Paulson, a ranch hand who'd lost his own small spread to Creed 2 winters back. While he lives in that big house, counting money squeezed from decent folks' misery. The crowd was dividing now, roughly into 2 camps. Creed's employees and those who feared him on one side, everyone else on the other. Lila saw her moment. "You want me to sign papers, Sheriff?" She held up the document Keene had presented. "Let's read them first. Shall we let everyone hear what I'm being asked to sign?" Before Keene could stop her, she began reading aloud. The language was dense, legal, but the meaning was clear. Not just the water rights, but the land itself, any mineral rights, and a clause that would prevent any Hart from ever making claims against Creed or his associates. "Sounds like someone's afraid of something," Calder observed. "What do you think, mister? Creed is worried might come to light." That's when Eva emerged from the crowd. Lila's heart stopped. Her sister looked terrible thin, frightened, her pretty face marked with healing bruises. She was accompanied by a young man with the soft look of someone more comfortable with books than guns. "Eva," Lila breathed. "I'm sorry," Eva said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Lila. I tried to run, but they found us. They brought us back." "Your sister's been very helpful," Creed said smoothly. "She's explained the whole deception, how you forced her to flee, took her place. Quite the ambitious little scheme." "That's a lie," Eva cried out. "I've told you nothing but lies. Lila didn't know anything until I left. She saved our family when I was too weak to—" Keene backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. The young man with her Thomas, Lila realized. The poet miner caught her before she hit the ground. That was a mistake. The crowd surged forward with an ugly roar. Even some of Creed's men looked uncomfortable. In the frontier, you might shoot a man in a fair fight, but you didn't hit women. Not in public, not like that. "Everyone calm down," Keene shouted, but his voice was drowned out. That's when the shooting started. Later, Lila could never say who fired first. One moment the crowd was shoving and shouting. The next, guns were being drawn, and the air filled with smoke and thunder. She saw Calder moving like lightning, pulling both her and Eva behind an overturned wagon as bullets whined overhead. "Stay down," he ordered, then rolled to one knee, his Navy Colt appearing in his hand like magic. The market square became a battlefield. Women screamed and ran for cover. Men dove behind anything that might stop a bullet. Keene's men fired from the platform, trying to control the crowd, but they were outnumbered now. The good people of San Perdito had finally had enough. Lila spotted a Winchester propped against the hardware store and made a dash for it. Bullets kicked up dust at her heels, but she reached the rifle and swung it up to her shoulder in one smooth motion. Her first shot took the gun out of one of Keene's men's hands. Her second pinned another behind a water barrel. "You know, the woman can shoot," someone yelled, and a ragged cheer went up from parts of the crowd. The battle might have gone on indefinitely, but then a new sound cut through the chaos, the thunder of many hooves. A dozen riders swept into the square, men wearing the silver stars of federal marshals. At their head rode a grizzled veteran with eyes like steel. "Federal marshals," he bellowed. "Everyone drop your weapons now." The authority in that voice was unmistakable. Slowly, reluctantly, men lowered their guns. The square fell silent except for the moans of the wounded. "I'm Chief Marshal Morrison," the leader announced. "I'm here for Calder Boone." Lila's heart sank. Had they come to arrest him? Had his cover been that thoroughly blown? But Calder stood up from behind the wagon, his badge, his real badge, glinting in the sun. About time you showed up, Chief. Morrison's weathered face cracked into a grim smile. Had to make sure we had enough evidence. Your wife's telegram about the Platt documents sealed it. He turned to Creed. Silas Creed, you're under arrest for federal mail fraud, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges I'll be happy to enumerate. You can't arrest me, Creed spluttered. I own this town. The town ain't federal jurisdiction. Mail fraud is. Morrison nodded to his men. Take him. Keene tried to run, but didn't make it 10 feet before a marshal's lasso dropped around his shoulders. Within minutes, Creed's entire inner circle was in irons. Lila found herself standing in the middle of the square, rifle still in her hands, trying to process what had just happened. Around her, townspeople were emerging from cover, many sporting cuts and bruises, but miraculously, no one seriously hurt. You all right? Calder appeared at her elbow, concern written across his face. I think so. She looked around at the chaos. Is it over? This part is. He gently took the rifle from her hands. But there's still the trial. We'll need to testify. She met his eyes. What happens to we when this is all done? Calder, when you don't need a wife with water rights anymore. Before he could answer, Ava approached, supported by Thomas. Her cheek was already swelling from Keene's blow. Lila, Not now? Lila couldn't deal with her sister yet. Maybe not ever. Just not now. Marshal Morrison approached, tipping his hat. Mrs. Boone, that was some fine shooting. Ever consider a career in law enforcement? I just want to keep my family's land. Marshal, well, I reckon that won't be a problem anymore. He glanced at Calder. We'll need you both in Las Vegas tomorrow for the preliminary hearings. Judge Carter wants depositions while everything's fresh. As the marshals led their prisoners away, the townspeople began to disperse. Some nodded to Lila as they passed recognition, perhaps even respect. She'd stood up to Creed and won. That counted for something out here. Lila. She turned to find Mrs. Martinez, the store owner's wife, holding out a shawl. Though you might need this, your jacket's torn. Looking down, Lila saw she was right. The jacket was ripped across the shoulder, probably from diving behind the wagon. She accepted the shawl gratefully. We're having a meeting, Mrs. Martinez continued. Tonight, at the church, to discuss what happens now that Creed's gone. We'd like you there. Both of you, she added, glancing at Calder. We'll be there, Lila promised. As the square emptied, she found herself standing with Calder in the spot where, just days ago, she'd been a frightened girl in a borrowed wedding dress. Now she was... What a wife a fighter, a woman who'd helped bring down a corrupt empire. You asked what happens to we, Calder said quietly. That's up to you. Lila, the marriage is legal, but if you want an annulment... Do you? The question came out sharper than she intended. He was quiet for a long moment. When I kissed you in that church, I meant it. Not as part of the act, not because I thought you were Eva. I kissed you because something in me recognized something in you. He touched her face gently, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. But I won't hold you to vows made under false pretenses. The choice is yours. Around them, San Perdido was already beginning to change. Creed's signs were being torn down. People walked a little taller, spoke a little louder. The fear that had gripped the town for so long was finally lifting. We have a meeting to attend, Lila said finally, and testimonies to give. Let's deal with today first. Tomorrow. Tomorrow can wait, he agreed. They walked together toward the church, side by side but not touching. Behind them, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. It had been a day of violence and revelation, of old fears faced and new possibilities glimpsed. But it wasn't over. Not yet. The storm came out of nowhere, as desert storms often do. One moment they were riding through the narrow canyon toward Las Vegas. The next, the sky had turned an ominous green-black, and the first fat drops of rain were spattering the red rock walls. "Flash flood weather!" Calder shouted over the rising wind. "We need high ground." They'd left San Perdito at dawn with Marshal Morrison and 2 deputies, but the lawmen had taken the main road while Calder insisted on this back road. Now, Lila understood why Creed's remaining men would be watching the obvious paths. This canyon had seemed safe an hour ago. Now it was a death trap. Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it seemed to shake the very mountains. The rain came in sheets, turning the dry creek bed they'd been following into a churning brown torrent within minutes. "There!" Lila pointed to a narrow ledge 20 feet up the canyon wall. It wasn't much, but it was above the water line. They drove the horses hard toward the ledge as the water rose with terrifying speed. Lila's mare stumbled, nearly going down, but recovered. Behind them, she could hear something else, a roaring that had nothing to do with thunder. "Wall of water coming!" Calder yelled. "Move!" They abandoned the horses at the base of the ledge, no time to do anything else, and scrambled up the slick rock face. Lila's boots slipped on wet stone, her fingers cramping as she searched for holds. Below, the horses were already swimming, their eyes rolling white with terror. Calder reached the ledge first and immediately turned to haul her up. She'd just cleared the edge when the flash flood hit with the force of a runaway train. The brown wall of water, carrying entire trees and boulders the size of wagons, swept through the canyon with a sound like the world ending. Their horses were gone in an instant, swept away. Their saddlebags, supplies, the precious evidence they'd been carrying to the judge all gone. They pressed against the canyon wall as water lapped at the ledge, rising by the second. The rain hammered down, cold as ice, soaking them to the skin within moments. "We need to go higher!" Lila shouted. But even as she said it, she saw Calder wasn't listening. He was staring up the canyon, and his face had gone pale beneath its tan. Following his gaze, she saw them riders, picking their way along the opposite rim. Even through the rain, she recognized the lead figure. Silas Creed. Somehow, impossibly, he'd escaped the marshals. "There must have been an ambush," Calder said grimly. "Morrison and his men." A gunshot cracked across the canyon, the bullet chipping rock inches from Lila's head. They were trapped flood below, killers above. Nowhere to run. "The cave," Calder pointed to a dark opening 10 feet above their current position. "It's our only chance." They climbed again, fingers and toes finding purchase on holds slick with rain. More shots rang out, but the storm was their ally. Now visibility was poor, and the wind threw off aim. They tumbled into the cave just as another massive surge of water claimed the ledge they'd been on. The cave was shallow, maybe 15 feet deep, but it was dry and out of the line of fire. They huddled against the back wall, gasping, soaked, alive. "How?" Lila managed between breaths. "How did Creed escape?" "Money, connections, a judge in his pocket somewhere." Calder was checking his weapons miraculously. His Navy Colt had stayed in its holster. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is he's here, and he wants us dead." Thunder crashed again, and in the brief illumination, Lila saw movement at the cave mouth. They weren't alone. Well. Amos Keene stood silhouetted against the storm, water streaming off his coat. "Looks like we're sharing accommodations." He wasn't alone. 2 more of Creed's men crowded in behind him, all armed, all focused on Calder and Lila. "Drop the iron, Boone," Keene ordered. "Don't think so." Calder's voice was steady as granite. "You fire in here. The ricochets will kill us all." Maybe that's acceptable losses, but Keene didn't draw. Nobody wanted to die in a cave barely big enough for 5 people. They stood in tense silence, weapons drawn but not aimed, while outside the storm raged. Water continued to rise in the canyon, now lapping at the cave entrance. If it rose much higher, they'd all drown regardless. "You know what I find interesting," Lila said suddenly. Her father had always told her that when cornered, the best weapon was often words. "Creed left you behind. Keen. He escaped, but he didn't take you with him." "Shut up. He's probably halfway to Mexico by now, while you're here, about to die for him." She pressed on, seeing doubt flicker in one of the other men's eyes. "What did he promise you, Moneyland? How's that working out?" "I said shut up." Keen stepped forward, raising his gun. That's when Ava appeared at the cave mouth. She was a ghastly sight, dress torn, hair plastered to her skull, supported by Thomas, who looked half-drowned himself. But she was alive. "Amos," she said, and her voice carried a weight of old familiarity. "Please, no more killing." Keen's gun wavered. "Eva, what are you doing here?" "What I should have done months ago." She stepped fully into the cave, Thomas close behind. "I'm here to tell the truth." "The truth?" Keen laughed bitterly. "Which version? The one where you promised to marry me before Creed turned your head, or the one where you used us both to get what you wanted?" Lila felt the world tilt. Ava and Keen. She looked at her sister with new eyes, seeing the calculation she'd always mistaken for delicacy. "I was 17, Ava said quietly. "Scared. Papa was dying, and you were kind to me. I thought—" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter what I thought. What matters is what Creed's planning. He's not running to Mexico. Amos, he's doubling back to poison the Blue Mesa Springs. If he can't have the water, no one can." "You're lying." "Am I? Think about it. Why else would he risk coming to this canyon instead of running? He sent you here to die while he destroys the valley's water supply." Ava's eyes blazed with desperate conviction. "Everyone who depends on that water, families, children, cattle, they'll all die, and he'll buy up the corpse of the valley for pennies." The cave fell silent, except for the storm. One of Keen's men lowered his gun slightly. "Boss, if she's right—" "My family has a ranch downstream from Blue Mesa," the other man said. "My kids drink that water." Keen stood frozen. His gun still pointed at Calder, but his eyes on Eva. In that moment, Lila saw him clearly not a monster, just a man who'd made wrong choices for what he thought were right reasons. "He played us all." Thomas spoke up, his mild voice somehow carrying over the thunder. "I've seen the chemicals he had shipped to the mining camp. Cyanide, they call it. Used in gold processing, but deadly poison in water." "You're all lying," Keen said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. That's when Creed himself appeared at the cave mouth. He looked like something out of a nightmare coat billowing, hair wild, a rifle in his hands. His pale eyes swept the crowded cave and landed on Eva. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," he said conversationally. "You always were too soft for what needed doing." "Silas," Keen started. "Shut up. Amos, you've served your purpose." Creed raised the rifle. "Time to clean house." Several things happened at once. Keen, finally understanding his betrayal, turned his gun on Creed. Thomas threw himself in front of Ava. Calder shoved Lila behind a rock outcropping. And the storm, as if in response to the human drama, sent a massive lightning bolt into the canyon rim above. The crack was deafening. Rock shattered. The cave mouth began to collapse. Creed fired once, the bullet catching Keen in the shoulder, spinning him around. Then tons of rock came down, sealing the entrance with a grinding roar that drowned out even the storm. They were trapped in absolute darkness. "Sound off." Calder's voice came from somewhere to Lila's left. "Who's alive?" "Here," Lila gasped. "We're all right," Ava said shakily. "Thomas is hurt but breathing." Keen, a groan from near where the entrance had been. "Still kicking, barely." "Johnson Hewitt." "Here, Mr. Boone." That was one of Keen's men. "We're done fighting. Just want to get home to our families." Calder struck a match, the sudden light almost painful. The cave was smaller now, the collapse having sealed them in but also blocked the rising water. They were alive but buried. "Thomas needs help," Ava said. Blood seeped between her fingers where she pressed against his side, not from Creed's bullet, but from flying rock. Lila moved without thinking, tearing strips from her shirt. "Hold pressure here. Calder, I need your flask." They worked by matchlight, cleaning and binding wounds. Keen's shoulder was bad but not fatal. Thomas had a gash along his ribs but would live. When the immediate medical needs were met, they faced a harder truth. "We're going to run out of air," Johnson said quietly. "Maybe not." Calder was examining the back wall of the cave. "Feel that air movement. These limestone caves often connect." They began exploring the back of the cave, finding a narrow crack that might lead somewhere. It would mean crawling through spaces barely big enough for a person with no guarantee of survival. "I'll go first," Calder said. "No." Lila stepped forward. "I'm smallest. I can fit through tighter spaces. Find the way." He started to protest, then stopped. She was right, and they both knew it. "Together, then," he said. "You lead, I'll follow." "What about us?" Keen asked from where he slumped against the wall. Calder looked at the wounded man for a long moment. "You tried to kill us an hour ago. And now I'm offering to testify against Creed, if we live." Keen's laugh was bitter. "Ava's right. He played me for a fool. Used my feelings for her, my anger, my pride. I want to see him hang." "Then you'd better start crawling," Lila said, "because we're not leaving anyone to die in the dark." One by one, they entered the crack in the cave wall. Lila first, then Calder, then Ava supporting Thomas. Keen came next, cursing with every movement of his wounded shoulder. Johnson and Hewitt brought up the rear. The passage was a nightmare tight, twisting, sometimes so narrow they had to exhale completely to squeeze through, but always, blessedly, there was moving air, suggesting an exit somewhere ahead. Time lost meaning in the darkness. They crawled until their knees were raw, climbed when the passage went vertical, waded when it filled with water. Once, Lila got stuck in a particularly tight spot, panic clawing at her throat until Calder's steady voice talked her through. Then, just when it seemed they could go no further, Lila saw light, real light, not the flickering of matches but honest daylight filtering through cracks ahead. They emerged on the far side of the canyon, muddy, bloodied, but alive. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean. In the distance, they could see smoke rising from the direction of the Blue Mesa Springs. "He's done it," Ava whispered. "He's poisoned the water." "Maybe not." Calder was already moving, checking the sun's position, calculating distances. "The springs are fed from multiple sources. If we can get to the main reservoir before the poison spreads." "You're talking about a dam," Johnson said. "Blow it. Let the poisoned water flush out before it can contaminate the whole system." "Exactly." "That's Creed's own dam." Hewitt protested. "He'll have men guarding it." "Then we'd better hurry," Lila said. She turned to Keen. "You want redemption, this is your chance." Keen struggled to his feet, face gray with pain. "I know where he keeps the dynamite." They set off across the desert, an unlikely alliance born of necessity and betrayal. Behind them, the canyon that had nearly been their tomb gurgled with receding floodwater. Ahead, the fate of the valley waited. And somewhere out there, Silas Creed thought he'd won. He was about to learn otherwise. The federal courthouse in Las Vegas was packed to the rafters. Word of Silas Creed's capture and the dramatic events at Blue Mesa had spread throughout the territory, drawing crowds eager to witness justice served. Judge Samuel Carter, a stern man with silver temples and penetrating eyes, presided from the bench with the gravity the occasion demanded. Lila sat in the witness section, her hand occasionally touching the leather notebook in her lap, the evidence that had survived everything, retrieved from a hidden cache Calder had made before their flight. Beside her, Ava held Thomas's hand, both still bearing the marks of their ordeal. Across the aisle, Marshal Morrison sat with his surviving deputies, his arm in a sling from the ambush that had temporarily freed Creed. "The court calls Amos Keene to the stand," the bailiff announced. Keene rose slowly, his shoulder still bandaged beneath his clean shirt. He'd been in federal custody since their return from Blue Mesa, where they'd managed to blow the dam just in time, flushing out the poisoned water before it could contaminate the valley's supply. The look he gave Creed as he passed the defendant's table could have melted iron. Mr. Keene," Prosecutor Daniels began. "You were formerly employed by the defendant." "I was sheriff of San Perdido," Keene corrected. "Though, as Mr. Boone pointed out, my appointment wasn't exactly legal." "And what was your relationship with Mr. Creed?" Keene's jaw tightened. "I thought he was bringing progress to the valley. Jobs, prosperity. I believed his vision of the future." He paused. "I was a fool." For the next hour, Keene laid out the intricate web of corruption Creed had woven: bribes to officials, intimidation of landowners, the systematic theft of water rights. His testimony was devastating, made more so by his obvious regret. "Why should this court believe you now?" Daniels asked. "You were part of this conspiracy." "Because I've got nothing left to lose." Keene said simply, "Creed took everything: my honor, my position, the woman I—" He glanced at Eva. "He used my feelings and my pride to make me his weapon. But when he pointed that rifle at all of us in the cave, ready to kill even his own people, I finally saw him clear." Creed's lawyer, a slick man imported from Kansas City, rose for cross-examination. "Mr. Keene, isn't it true you're testifying in exchange for leniency?" "I'm testifying because it's right." Keene shot back. "I'll take whatever punishment the court sees fit, but Creed needs to be stopped before he destroys another valley, another town." When Keene stepped down, Judge Carter called a brief recess. Lila stepped outside for air, finding Calder on the courthouse steps. He'd testified yesterday, laying out his investigation in methodical detail. In his dark suit and string tie, he looked every inch the federal agent, though she could still see the desert rider beneath. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Better than I expected." She studied his face, noting the new lines around his eyes. The past weeks had aged them both. "Any word from the marshal's office?" "Morrison wants me to take a permanent position, full deputy marshal, with a territory to oversee." "That's wonderful." The words came out flatter than she intended. "Is it—" He turned to face her fully. "Lila, we need to talk about—" "Hey, Mrs. Boone, they're ready for you." Lila's testimony was the heart of the prosecution's case. She spoke clearly and calmly about her family's struggles, Creed's attempts to force them off their land, the desperation that had led to her taking Ava's place at the altar. When she produced Tom Platt's documents showing the fraudulent assay reports, Creed's lawyer objected so strenuously that Judge Carter had to threaten him with contempt. "Mrs. Boone," the defense attorney said during cross-examination, "you admitted to impersonating your sister to enter into a marriage contract. How do we know you're not lying now?" "Because I'm here," Lila said evenly. "I could have run, could have hidden. Instead, I'm sitting in open court, admitting to my deception. I lied once to save my family. I won't lie again." "Yet you expect this court to believe." "I expect this court to look at the evidence," Lila interrupted. "The documents, the testimonies, the bodies of cattle dead from poisoned water. I expect this court to ask why Silas Creed was willing to destroy an entire valley's water supply rather than let it remain in the hands of the people who've worked it for generations." The lawyer tried several more angles of attack, but Lila held firm. When she finally stepped down, she caught Creed's eye. His pale gaze promised retribution. But she stared him down until he looked away first. Ava's testimony came next, and it was perhaps the most damaging of all. She spoke of Creed's initial courtship, how he'd seemed charming and successful, how that had changed once he believed he had her trapped. He told me I'd help him acquire my family's water rights, or he'd ruin us all, Ava said, tears streaming down her face. When I tried to refuse, he made it clear that accidents happened in the desert, that my sister liked to ride alone, that my mother was sick and vulnerable. So you agreed to the marriage with Mr. Boone, Daniels prompted gently. Creed arranged it all. He said the Boone Ranch was the last major water source he needed to control the valley. Once I married Calder Boone and signed over my rights, Creed would have everything. Ava's voice dropped. I couldn't do it. I couldn't trap a good man in Creed's web. So I ran, leaving your sister to face the consequences. My greatest shame, Ava whispered. But also, perhaps, the one good thing I did, because Lila is stronger than I ever was. She stopped him when I couldn't. The trial continued for 3 more days. Witnesses testified to Creed's pattern of intimidation and fraud. The surviving federal marshals described the ambush that had freed him temporarily. Johnson and Hewitt granted immunity for their cooperation, detailed the criminal organization from the inside. Through it all, Creed sat silent and still, showing emotion only when Judge Harlan was mentioned, the corrupt Kansas judge who'd been arrested trying to flee to Canada. On the final day, Calder was recalled to explain the federal jurisdiction aspects of the case, as he laid out how Creed's crimes crossed territorial boundaries, making them federal matters. Lila found herself watching him with a mixture of pride and something deeper. This was who he truly was, not just a cowboy or a gunfighter, but a man dedicated to justice. The jury will now retire to consider their verdict. Judge Carter announced when closing arguments concluded. They didn't have to wait long. Within 2 hours, the jury filed back in, their faces grave. We find the defendant, Silas Creed, guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others wept with relief. Creed showed his first real emotion, his face contorting with rage as he was led away in chains. He'd hang, most likely, or spend the rest of his life in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, as the crowd dispersed, Lila found herself standing with Ava in the afternoon sun. The silence between them was heavy with things unsaid. I'm leaving, Ava said finally. Thomas has family in California. We'll make a fresh start there. Running again. No, choosing. Ava met her eyes. I'll never be brave like you, Lila, but maybe I can learn to be good. What about Mama? I've already said goodbye. She understood. Ava touched Lila's arm hesitantly. I know I have no right to ask, but can you forgive me? Lila thought about the fear and desperation that had driven them all, about second chances and the price of survival. I'm working on it, she said honestly. Maybe someday. Ava nodded, accepting this gift of possibility. Take care of yourself, sister, and that man of yours. He's not, but Ava was already walking away, toward Thomas and their uncertain future. She's right, you know. Lila turned to find Calder behind her. About what? I am yours. Have been since that kiss in the church. He stepped closer. Question is, are you mine? Calder. I know we started with a lie. I know there's been nothing traditional or proper about any of this. But Lila, he took her hands. I've been alone a long time, living for the job, for justice, for the next assignment. Then you came along and showed me there could be more. You have that deputy marshal position, she pointed out. You'll be traveling, chasing outlaws. Only if I take it. She blinked. What? Morrison also mentioned there's a need for territorial liaisons, someone to work with local communities, help them establish proper law enforcement, mediate water disputes. His twilight eyes held hers. It would mean staying in one area, building something instead of always chasing, maybe raising horses on the side, maybe raising other things. Heat crept up her cheeks. Calder Boone, is that a proposal? We're already married, he reminded her. This would be more of a reaffirmation, a chance to do it right. He pulled something from his pocket, a simple gold ring, different from the one he'd placed on her finger in that chaotic ceremony. This was my grandmother's. She was a frontier woman too, tough as leather, soft as silk when it mattered. She'd have liked you. Lila looked at the ring, at the man offering it, at the life spreading before them like the desert after rain. We'd stay in San Perdido. If you want, your mother needs care, and the town needs rebuilding. Or we could go somewhere else, start fresh, together. And if I wanted to keep the Hart name for the water rights, the land deeds, then I'd be proud to be Mr. Hart. His smile was crooked. Wouldn't be the strangest thing we've done. She laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. No, I suppose it wouldn't. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, she kissed him. Not desperately like in the church, not gratefully like after Blue Mesa, but deliberately. A choice made in full sunlight, with clear eyes and steady hands. When they broke apart, both breathless, she held out her hand for the ring. Yes, Calder, to all of it, to staying, building, raising things, to being us whoever that turns out to be. He slipped the ring on her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged. Around them, Las Vegas bustled with life, with people pursuing their own dreams and schemes, but for this moment, they were the still center of a turning world. We should head home, Lila said finally. Mama will be worried. Home. Calder tested the word. I like the sound of that. They walked together toward the livery stable where their horses waited new mounts, since their faithful companions had been lost in the flood. As they passed the telegraph office, Lila noticed a crowd gathering around a posted notice. What's happening? She asked a passerby. Haven't you heard? They're forming a water cooperative in San Perdido. Equal shares for all landowners. Fair distribution, elected board, first of its kind in the territory. Lila and Calder exchanged glances. It was starting the change they'd fought for, bled for, nearly died for. Justice not just in removing the corrupt, but in building something better. Looks like we'll have our work cut out for us, Calder observed. Good thing we're partners then. She took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him. Equal partners. Wouldn't have it any other way. Mrs. Boone. Hart Boone, she corrected. I've decided to use both. He laughed, a rich sound that drew smiles from those they passed. Of course you have. Come on, Lila Hart Boone. Let's go home. They rode out of Las Vegas as the sun touched the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Behind them lay the courthouse where justice had been served. Ahead lay San Perdido, with all its challenges and possibilities. It wouldn't be easy. There would be disputes to settle, systems to build, probably a few more fights before all was said and done, but they would face it all together honestly this time, with no lies between them. And that, Lila thought as they picked up the pace toward home, made all the difference. The cottonwood trees along Blue Mesa Creek had turned gold with autumn, their leaves dancing in the gentle breeze that carried the promise of rain. Real rain this time, not the false hope of thunder without water that had plagued them for so long. The drought had finally broken 3 months after Creed's conviction, as if the land itself had been waiting for justice before allowing healing to begin. Lila stood beneath the largest cottonwood, adjusting the simple wreath of wildflowers in her hair. She wore her mother's wedding dress carefully altered to fit her taller, stronger frame rather than the borrowed finery of that first ceremony. This time, everything was real. This time, She was choosing. "You look beautiful," Margaret Hart said from her chair nearby. The months of proper care and the lifting of constant worry had worked wonders. Though still frail, she had color in her cheeks and strength in her voice. "Your father would be so proud." "Don't make me cry before the ceremony, Mama." Lila smoothed the dress, her hands only slightly trembling. Through the trees, she could see the gathering crowd. It seemed all of San Perdido had come to witness this second wedding, this true wedding. The wooden platform they'd built was decorated with autumn sage and late-blooming desert marigolds. Simple benches made from sawhorses and planks provided seating for the elderly and infirm. "Quite a difference from the first time," Mrs. Abernathy observed, approaching with a softer expression than Lila had ever seen her wear. "This is how it should have been." The minister's wife had become one of Lila's unexpected allies in rebuilding the town. Turned out she had a head for figures and a talent for organization that had proved invaluable in establishing the water cooperative. "Any word from Eva?" Margaret asked hopefully. "She sent a letter." Lila pulled the folded paper from her pocket. "They're well. Thomas found work at a newspaper, and she's taking in sewing. They named the baby Lily." Her mother's eyes misted. "After you. After both of us. She says, the flower and the person who taught her what strength really means." Lila tucked the letter away. She and Eva might never be close again, but the bitter anger had faded. Time and distance were working their healing magic. Music began not the wheezing organ of the town church, but Samuel Martinez's guitar joined by his daughter's violin. The melody was simple and sweet, carrying across the water where the creek ran clear and strong. "That's our cue," Mrs. Abernathy said. "Ready." Lila took a breath, then nodded. She was ready, more than ready. The walk to the platform was different this time, too. No counting floorboards, no hiding behind a veil. She walked with her head high, meeting the eyes of friends and neighbors who smiled back with genuine warmth. These people had seen her at her worst and her best. They'd fought beside her, rebuilt beside her. She'd earned her place among them. Calder waited at the makeshift altar, and the sight of him still took her breath away. He wore his best suit, but she could see the marks of honest work on him, the deeper tan from days training horses, the calluses from helping rebuild burned barns. Marshal Morrison stood beside him as best man, having made the journey from Santa Fe specifically for this occasion. "Second thoughts," Morrison murmured to Calder, just loud enough for Lila to hear as she approached. "Never had a first one," Calder replied, his eyes never leaving Lila's face. Reverend Morrison, no relation to the marshal, beamed as Lila took her place. This was his first wedding since the Troubles, and he seemed determined to make it memorable. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather here under God's sky to witness something remarkable, not just a wedding, but a reaffirmation, a choosing. These two people have already walked through fire together. They've stood against corruption, survived the desert's worst, and helped heal our community. Now they choose to stand together again, not from necessity, but from love." Lila barely heard the familiar words of the ceremony. She was too lost in Calder's eyes, in the small smile that played at his lips, in the solid warmth of his hands holding hers. "The rings," Reverend Morrison prompted. This time, Lila had a ring for Calder, too, a simple gold band she'd had made from a nugget her father had kept, planning to make something special someday. Today was that day. "Calder," she said, slipping the ring onto his finger, "I take you as my husband, my partner, my equal, in drought and in plenty, in peace and in trouble, in all the days given to us." "Lila," he replied, his voice rough with emotion as he placed his grandmother's ring on her finger again. "I take you as my wife, my partner, my home, in all weather, all seasons, all the trails we'll ride." Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico and the Lord above, Reverend Morrison declared, "I pronounce you still and truly and forever husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Boone. Calder cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. Mrs. Hart Boone, he murmured. This kiss was different too. The first had been recognition, desperate and surprising. This was coming home, sweet and sure and witnessed by their whole community under the autumn sun. When they parted, the crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "Now that's how you seal a marriage," someone called out, prompting laughter. The celebration that followed was everything the first reception should have been. Long tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by every family: venison stew, cornbread, pies made from the first apples of the season. Children ran between the adults' legs while musicians played and people danced on the packed earth. Amos Keene sat at one of the tables, still recovering from his imprisonment, but a free man thanks to his testimony and Lila's surprising advocacy at his sentencing. He raised his glass of apple cider in a silent toast when he caught her eye, then turned back to his conversation with the town blacksmith about honest work. "Quite a party," Marshal Morrison observed, joining Lila and Calder where they stood watching the festivities. "Makes a man think about settling down himself." "The offer stands," Calder said. "The territory needs good lawmen." "And I need men like you wearing badges." Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. "The arrangement you've worked out here, local liaison, part-time deputy, it's smart. We might implement it territory-wide." As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in those familiar shades of rose and gold, Lila found herself by the creek with Calder. The music and laughter continued behind them, but here it was peaceful, just the sound of water over stones. "No regrets?" she asked. "Only one." He pulled her close. "That it took us so long to get here." "We needed the journey," she said, resting her head against his chest. "Both of us, to know who we really are, what we really want." "And what do you want?" Lila Hart Boone. She thought about it, watching the water that ran clear where poison had once threatened. This home, family, honest work, raising horses and maybe children, building something that lasts. Sounds like a good life. The best life. They stood together as the first stars appeared, reflected in the moving water. Tomorrow there would be work, always work in the territory. The water cooperative needed managing, disputes needed settling, and Calder had 3 young colts to start training. Lila had orders for saddles backed up through winter, and her mother needed tending. But tonight was for celebration, for dancing under the stars, for being grateful that 2 people who'd started with a lie had found their way to truth. "We should get back," Lila said eventually. "It's our party, after all." In a moment, Calder turned her to face him. "I want to remember this. You, here, like this, my wife, my actual choosing me of her own free will wife. Always," she promised. "No more lies, no more pretense, just us." Hand in hand, they walked back to their celebration. The party would go late into the night with stories told and retold of their adventures, of Creed's downfall, of the town's rebirth. These would become the legends of San Perdido, growing with each telling. But the truth was simpler and somehow better. 2 people had found each other in the midst of deception and danger. They'd chosen love over fear, community over greed, justice over easy wrong. They'd helped save a valley and discovered themselves in the process. As Lila danced with her husband under the cottonwood trees, surrounded by the people they'd fought to protect, she thought about the girl who'd stood at a well months ago, desperate and afraid. That girl could never have imagined this moment, this joy, this peace, this rightness of being exactly where she belonged. The wind picked up, rattling the golden leaves above them. But now it didn't matter. As she'd told her mother in the darkest days, the wind in the west would always be harsh, but a home was where you stood together to face it. And they would. Whatever came, drought or plenty, trouble or peace, they would face it together. Not because they had to, not because circumstances forced them, but because they chose to. Every day, in every weather, for all the trails ahead. The music played on. The creek sang its endless song, and under the vast New Mexico sky, Lila Hart Boone danced with her husband at their real wedding, finally and truly home. The stars wheeled overhead, the same stars that had watched over their desperate flight, their dangerous confrontations, their journey to justice. Now, those stars witnessed something quieter but no less profound, the simple celebration of love honestly declared and community restored. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope you enjoyed following Lila and Calder's journey from that desperate wedding to their true celebration of love. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what you thought about their adventure. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to my channel Wild West Night for more stories of romance and adventure in the American frontier. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button to help more listeners discover this story. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.